History remembers the flyers, the scorers, the men who filled highlight reels and sold sneakers. But every dynasty, every legend, every basketball god had a shadow. And sometimes that shadow was the reason they survived. When people talk about the 1970s and early 1980s NBA, they talk about Julius Erving soaring through the air. They talk about Kareem's skyhook. They talk about Larry Bird's trash talk and ice-cold jumpers. What they almost never talk about is the man who made life miserable for all of them without ever demanding credit. Bobby Jones wasn't flashy. He didn't dominate box scores. He didn't chase points or headlines. And because of that, history quietly pushed him aside. But ask the players who faced him. Ask the superstars who suddenly had their worst shooting nights. Ask Julius Erving himself, whose legacy might look very different without one teammate willing to sacrifice glory for control. This is the story of the greatest defender you've never heard of. A man who locked down legends, reshaped what defense meant in the NBA, and became the silent backbone of one of basketball's most iconic teams. This isn't just Bobby Jones's story. It's the untold side of NBA greatness, the side that doesn't fly, but wins.
Also helping, so Steve goes deep from the right baseline. A long rebound, and here comes Nixon. Leinsberger cuts from the left side, and Bobby Jones with a marvelous block.
Before Bobby Jones ever guarded Julius Erving's teammates, before he chased Larry Bird through screens or frustrated elite scorers into bad decisions, defense wasn't glamorous. In fact, it was barely respected. Bobby Jones grew up in North Carolina, not with dreams of becoming a superstar, but with an obsession for discipline. He wasn't the fastest player on the court. He wasn't the strongest. What separated him was anticipation, the rare ability to see a play before it happened. Coaches noticed early that Jones didn't gamble. He calculated. Every steal, every block, every rotation felt intentional, like chess rather than chaos. At the University of North Carolina, under legendary coach Dean Smith, Jones learned something that would define his entire career. Team defense beats individual brilliance. Smith's system demanded trust, communication, and sacrifice. Bobby Jones thrived in it. While others chased points, Jones chased mistakes. He became a master of positioning, closing space without fouling, and mentally exhausting opponents. By the time he entered the NBA in 1974, the league wasn't ready for him. The NBA at that time worshipped offense. Defensive specialists were tolerated, not celebrated. And Bobby Jones immediately confused people. He didn't talk trash. He didn't flex. He simply erased players. Night after night, scorers who averaged 25 points suddenly struggled to reach 15. Wings avoided his side of the floor. Coaches adjusted entire game plans because of where Bobby Jones stood. But here's the uncomfortable truth: the box score didn't show it. Jones averaged modest points per game, often under double digits. His assists were quiet, his rebounds steady but unspectacular. Yet advanced understanding, long before advanced stats existed, revealed his impact. Opponents shot dramatically worse when guarded by him. Turnovers spiked, rhythm disappeared, confidence drained, and still, he was overlooked. That changed when Julius Erving entered his world. When the Philadelphia 76ers paired Dr. J with Bobby Jones, something rare happened. A team found balance. Erving was freedom, creativity, chaos in the air. Bobby Jones was structure, control, gravity on the floor. One flew, the other anchored. This is where Bobby Jones stopped being just a great defender and became indispensable. But what really made him legendary wasn't just defense, it was who he defended and how badly he broke their rhythm without ever raising his voice.
Collins to Bobby Jones, going to the hoop. Basket counts and a foul on Bird, and some fan just threw.
When Bobby Jones arrived in Philadelphia, the NBA finally placed him on a stage big enough to expose an uncomfortable truth. Defense could control stars, not just slow them down. The 76ers already had Julius Erving, the most electrifying player of his era. Dr. J didn't just score, he lifted arenas. But even legends need protection, not physical protection, strategic protection. Someone who could absorb the hardest assignments so the superstar could soar. That someone was Bobby Jones. Night after night, Jones was handed the toughest job in basketball: guard the opponent's best scorer, regardless of position. Small forward, shooting guard, power forward, didn't matter. Bobby Jones took them all, and he did it without fouling, without drama, and without mercy. Players noticed immediately. Larry Bird once said that the toughest defenders weren't the loud ones, they were the ones who never stopped being in the right place. Jones was everywhere Bird wanted to go, before Bird decided to go there. He cut off angles, he closed space without contact, he turned elite scorers into hesitant shooters, and that hesitation, that's death in the NBA. What made Jones especially terrifying was his discipline. He didn't bite on fakes, he didn't chase blocks. Instead, he forced stars into inefficient shots, the kind that ruin rhythm and confidence. A scorer might still finish with 20 points, but on 22 shots. Coaches knew what that meant. Behind the scenes, scouting reports changed. Teams stopped running isolation plays on his side. Ball handlers passed early, some players outright avoided switches that would put Jones on them, but the public didn't see that. The league still judged greatness by points per game. Bobby Jones averaged modest numbers, often around 9 to 13 points per game, a handful of rebounds, and quiet assist totals. Yet his true stats lived in opponent frustration, lowered shooting percentages, rushed decisions, broken offensive sets. Advanced analytics didn't exist yet, but if they had, Bobby Jones would have terrified spreadsheets. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, Jones became a defensive anchor for the Sixers' finals runs. While Julius Erving attacked from the sky, Jones erased options on the ground. It was a perfect contradiction. One thrived on freedom, the other on restriction. And here's the irony. Bobby Jones didn't even start many games. He willingly came off the bench, not because he wasn't good enough, but because he understood timing. He knew when to apply pressure. He knew when to disrupt momentum. Coaches trusted him to close games more than open them. That selflessness confused fans and doomed his legacy, because history doesn't reward players who sacrifice spotlight. Yet within NBA circles, respect grew quietly. Coaches whispered about him. Players dreaded matchups. Broadcasters struggled to explain why stars had off nights against Philadelphia. The answer was usually standing right next to them, and the biggest test was still coming, a rivalry that would define toughness, pride, and defensive excellence. Larry Bird wasn't just a scorer, he was a psychological weapon, and Bobby Jones was one of the few who never blinked. Larry Bird didn't fear many defenders. He talked too much, shot too well, and thought too fast to be rattled by reputation alone. Trash talk was his weapon, confidence his shield. Most defenders lost the battle before the opening tip, because Bird didn't just beat you, he humiliated you. But Bobby Jones was different. There was nothing to provoke, no ego to poke, no reaction to feed on. That silence bothered Bird more than trash talk ever could. Whenever Philadelphia faced Boston, the chess match began early. Coaches knew the assignment. Jones on Bird wasn't about stopping him, that was impossible. It was about making him work for every breath. Bobby Jones studied tendencies like a scientist. Where Bird preferred to catch the ball, which shoulder he turned over first, when he liked to pump fake just once instead of twice. Jones didn't guard Bird's hands. He guarded his options. Bird still scored. He always did. But against Jones, the efficiency dipped, the comfort vanished, and the joy drained from the game. Possessions turned into labor. Cuts turned into collisions with space that no longer existed. Passing lanes shrank. Rhythm disappeared. The rivalry never had a signature moment, because Bobby Jones never chased moments. No hard fouls, no stare downs, no revenge plays, just relentless positioning. Teammates noticed something strange. After games against Philadelphia, scorers like Bird would sit quietly in the locker room. No jokes, no celebration, even after wins. They had been mentally taxed. That's a kind of defense box scores never capture. Jones's value skyrocketed in the playoffs, where preparation mattered more than flash. Series slowed down, every possession carried weight, and suddenly, a player who thrived on discipline became priceless. While stars pressed, Jones stayed level. While games tightened, he loosened nothing, yet controversy followed him quietly. Despite being named to multiple all-defensive first teams and winning Defensive Player of the Year, many around the league believed he deserved more recognition, more minutes, even a bigger offensive role. Some argued that if he had chased stats instead of sacrifices, he would have been remembered alongside the greatest two-way players ever. But that wasn't Bobby Jones. He rejected ego the same way he rejected shot attempts. His faith, his personality, his calm, all of it made him uncomfortable with self-promotion. He believed basketball was a responsibility, not a stage. And in an era increasingly obsessed with star power, that mindset made him invisible to casual fans. The irony is brutal. Bobby Jones played in an era defined by legendary rivalries. Magic versus Bird, Lakers versus Celtics, offense versus offense. And yet one of the most consistent forces shaping those outcomes wasn't a scorer at all. It was a defender who never needed the ball to dominate the game. By the mid-1980s, whispers began circulating around the league. Younger players studied him. Coaches showed film. Analysts quietly acknowledged the truth. Bobby Jones was changing how defense was taught. Not through aggression, but anticipation. Not through fouls, but angles. Not through highlights, but habits. And still, the public barely noticed. Which leads to the most controversial question of all. The one history still avoids. Was Bobby Jones too good at sacrificing himself for the team? And did that choice cost him the legacy he deserved? That answer lies in what came after the cheers faded. By the time Bobby Jones reached the later stages of his career, the league around him was changing fast. The NBA was becoming louder, brighter, more individual-driven. Stars were brands now. Flash mattered. Offense sold shoes. Defense quietly kept winning games, but it no longer sold stories. And that shift slowly pushed a player like Bobby Jones into the background even while he was still doing elite work every single night. Stat sheets never told his story properly. He averaged modest points because he was never supposed to score. His career points per game hovered in numbers that casual fans brushed aside without context. But coaches understood something the public didn't. When Bobby Jones was on the floor, the other team's best player was never comfortable. Their timing was off. Their confidence wavered. Their decisions slowed down just enough to change outcomes. During his prime years, Jones consistently ranked among the league leaders in steals and defensive impact even without chasing the ball. He finished his career with more than 1,500 steals at a time when defensive tracking barely existed. He made 11 all-defensive teams, 8 of them first-team selections, which puts him in rare air historically. He won Defensive Player of the Year while playing limited minutes compared to other stars, which alone should have rewritten how value is measured. But the most telling statistic never showed up in box scores. Lineups with Bobby Jones simply won more. Coaches trusted him to close games not because he would score but because he would prevent disasters. Missed rotations disappeared, fouls dropped, communication sharpened. Younger players looked calmer when he was beside them. He became the invisible glue holding high-pressure moments together, and yet debates followed him quietly. Some analysts argued that Jones sacrificed too much of his own legacy by accepting reduced offensive roles and coming off the bench. Others believed he could have averaged 20 points if given freedom. There were even whispers that his humility hurt his career earnings and post-retirement recognition. In a league that rewards self-promotion, Bobby Jones almost refused to be remembered. News coverage during his retirement reflected that contradiction. Articles praised his character more than his impact. Headlines called him a gentleman, a role model, a perfect teammate. All true, but very few called him what he actually was: one of the most dominant defensive players in NBA history. Years later, modern analytics would finally catch up to what film already showed. Defensive win shares on off-ratings matchup data all pointed to the same truth. Bobby Jones affected elite scorers the way few defenders ever have. His ability to guard multiple positions without fouling, without gambling, and without losing discipline became the blueprint for modern switch-heavy defenses. Players like Kawhi Leonard, Draymond Green, and even Scottie Pippen followed paths Bobby Jones quietly carved decades earlier. The difference was visibility. Those players had cameras, narratives, marketing machines. Jones had silence. Even his rivalry with stars like Larry Bird never turned into soundbites because Jones refused to engage. No quotes, no controversy, no headline-friendly tension, and in doing so he unintentionally erased himself from popular memory. But inside NBA circles his reputation never faded. Coaches still reference him in film rooms. Veterans still mention him when talking about professionalism. And defensive specialists still study his footwork angles and patience as if they were sacred texts. The league moved on, but his fingerprints never left the game, which brings us to the final uncomfortable truth. Bobby Jones didn't fail to become famous. He chose something harder. He chose to matter. And that choice reshaped basketball in ways most fans never realized. The payoff of that choice, the quiet cost, and the legacy it left behind, can only be understood at the very end of his story. That is where everything finally comes into focus. If Bobby Jones entered today's NBA, the conversation around him would sound completely different. In a league obsessed with versatility, switchability, and defensive impact, he would not be an afterthought. He would be a headline. Teams would fight to build entire systems around him. Analysts would argue over his value nightly. Front offices would throw max contracts at a player who could guard everyone and never break the structure of a defense. Modern basketball finally speaks Bobby Jones's language. Positionless defense is no longer a luxury. It is survival. Stars hunt mismatches relentlessly. Offenses force switches until someone breaks. And in that environment, Bobby Jones becomes priceless. At 6'9", with elite lateral movement instincts and discipline, he would comfortably guard guards, wings, and power forwards without fouling or panicking. He would erase mismatches instead of creating them. The very thing teams fear most would disappear when he checked into the game. Advanced analytics would adore him. Defensive rating on off-splits, lineup net ratings, matchup data would all reveal what coaches knew decades ago. When Bobby Jones plays, the game tilts. Opposing stars shoot worse, commit more turnovers, and take harder shots. His value would show up everywhere except traditional box scores, which no longer define greatness anyway. And the offensive limitations that once held him back would no longer be viewed as weaknesses. In today's NBA, spacing, ball movement, and quick decisions matter more than isolation scoring for role players. Jones was already elite at that. He moved the ball instantly. He cut at the right moments. He never stalled possessions. Surrounded by modern shooting and pace, his offensive efficiency would quietly climb without changing who he was. The comparison conversations would be unavoidable. He would be mentioned alongside players like Draymond Green, Kawhi Leonard, and Scottie Pippen. But even those comparisons fall short. Bobby Jones played defense with almost no fouling, at a time when physical contact was constant. He defended without gambling in an era that rewarded aggression. His discipline would stand out even more today, where mistakes are punished instantly. And then there is the money. In today's market, defensive anchors with versatility are paid like stars. Jones would not be a role player contract. He would be a franchise investment, a culture setter, the kind of player front offices trust to raise the floor of everyone around him, the kind coaches build playoff rotations around without hesitation. But the most fascinating part of imagining Bobby Jones today is not how much he would earn or how often his name would trend. It is how uncomfortable he would make modern debates, because he would force fans to confront a truth the game still struggles with. That value does not always look like points. That impact does not always demand attention. That winning often belongs to players who disappear so others can shine. Bobby Jones would challenge a generation raised on highlights to appreciate restraint, to recognize anticipation over explosion, to understand that greatness can exist without celebration. And maybe that is why his story still matters so much, because the game keeps evolving, but the question remains the same. Do we truly know how to value players who make everything else possible? Bobby Jones never asked that question out loud. He answered it every night on the floor. If basketball history were written only by highlight reels and scoring titles, Bobby Jones would barely exist. No signature crossover, no iconic poster dunk, no 30-point nights that forced arenas to buzz. And yet the deeper you look, the harder it becomes to ignore a simple truth. The NBA we watch today would not function the same way without him. Bobby Jones proved something radical, long before analytics or modern schemes gave language to it. He proved that defense alone could bend games, that intelligence, anticipation, and discipline could neutralize talent just as effectively as raw athleticism. He showed that you did not need the ball to control outcomes. You only needed to understand space, timing, and responsibility better than the man across from you. In an era dominated by legends Larry Bird, Julius Erving, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bobby Jones willingly stood in their shadow and still altered their nights. He guarded greatness without fear and without ego. He accepted roles others would reject. He came off the bench when his ability demanded more minutes. He sacrificed numbers for structure, praise for purpose, legacy for winning. And the irony is brutal. The very qualities that made him one of the greatest defenders the league has ever seen are the same reasons his name rarely comes up in debates today. He did not chase fame, so fame never chased him back. He did not speak loudly, so history did not quote him often. He did not demand credit, so credit moved on without him. But basketball remembers in other ways. Every switch-heavy defense, every positionless stopper, every player praised for doing the dirty work without complaint carries a piece of Bobby Jones, whether they know it or not. He changed how defense was valued long before it was fashionable to talk about impact beyond scoring. He was the answer before the question existed. So maybe the real question is not why you have never heard his name enough. Maybe the question is why the league still struggles to celebrate players like him. Because Bobby Jones represents a version of greatness that does not sell easily, but lasts forever. A version that wins quietly, sustains dynasties, and makes stars possible by doing the work no one wants to do. He was never the loudest player on the floor. He was just the one you could not escape. And once you truly understand that, you start to realize something unsettling. The greatest defender you never heard of may have been one of the most important players the game ever had.